much stronger than, even though they're smaller, they're physically stronger than I. And so I would rough and tumble play with them. And it was, I would always lose because they have 4 hands and they can put you in a knot in a way that is impossible for me to get out of. And each time I would protest, I would say, ow, and let them know that they were going too far with me. They would be very worried. They would come around and they would look at my face and they would be looking very worried and sort of like surprised that this big fellow was so weak in their opinion, And then they would slow down their play and they would be very gentle for 10 minutes or so. They would be very gentle with me.
So they can calibrate it.
Yeah, and that's how play goes. Also in dogs, play is constantly measuring what is painful, what is not painful. And of course, the goal is to have fun. That's the main goal. So that calibration is going on the whole time. Yeah.
Right. Well, and so, Piaget, Jean Piaget wrote an absolutely stellar book on the development of morality out of the spirit of play. It's a great book. And, he showed, so he also, and this is germane to your work, he made a technical case that any organization that's based on the spirit of voluntary reciprocity will, over a reasonable period of time, outcompete any organization based on the spirit of compulsion, because if you use force and compulsion, you have to waste energy and resources on the compulsion, plus you don't optimally motivate. And so that's another pointer to an intrinsic ethic of reciprocal cooperation. And I think that so one of the things I've been thinking about lately is the best rejoinder to the sort of postmodern and neo-Marxist insistence that it's power and dominance above all is that no, it's not. That's an aberration from the spirit of play. Because if a society and any social interaction is optimally structured, then it moves into the domain of voluntary play. It's mutually enjoyable, it stays on the side of positive emotion, and it also involves this continual mutual collaboration, which children start to seriously negotiate between the ages of 2 and 4.
Yeah. And so what you mentioned is that socialization is mostly done by children, by the peers. That's a very interesting thought, because in my discussion of gender, I noticed that many people think that socialization is a one-way street. The parents socialize their children. And I think parents overestimate their influence on children. I think children socialize themselves to a large degree. I call it self-socialization. They look for adult models. It can be the mother, can be the father, can be somebody else. They look for adult models, can also be imaginary models that they see on TV, basically.
Yep. Well, that's the purpose of fiction, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Fiction puts up ritual models for emulation.
Yeah, and so the children socialize themselves, and then in addition you have all the peer influences on them, and so I think parents totally overestimate their effect on the children.
Our research at Montreal basically indicated that the proper, so imagine that the averaged parent, which would be sort of the consequence of a monogamous relationship, right? So 2 half insane people unite and produce one moderately sane person, and then that sane person is a analog of the general social environment. And then the purpose of that sane person on the socialization front is to help the child manage his or her behavior so that they become optimally socially acceptable by the age of 4 when their peers take over. And so that's that's how it seems to be. And then, you talk about this self-socialization. So how can kids self-socialize? And part of the answer to that is, if you don't socialize your children in a manner they find enjoyable, let's say in the spirit of play, I know some discipline is necessary, but in the spirit of play, the children will vociferously and continually object, right? They'll cry, they'll be uncooperative, they certainly won't be enthusiastic. And so there is a dynamic dance there right from the beginning that the child I think this is also why, by the way, there's all these studies showing that there's a fair genetic influence on temperament, and there's a pretty decent influence of non-shared environment, but there's hardly any influence of shared environment. And I think the reason for that isn't so much that parents are irrelevant, but that good parents particularize the environment so much in response to their child's temperament that there isn't a lot of overlap.
So in the other primates, we see the same thing. We see that young females, they imitate their mother more than young males. Young males. So, for example, a recent study on orangutans in the forest found that daughters eat exactly the same foods as their moms. Sons, they have a more variety in their diet. You know, there's hundreds and hundreds of plants around and fruits around, so they learn their diet from others. And so the sons, they learn it mostly from males and other individuals that they see around. There's other studies on tool use, for example, that daughters copy exactly the tool technology that their mom uses. Sons, they're on their own with that, and they develop their own tool technologies. And so in the primates we see, because a chimp is adult when he's 16, so there's a very long learning period. We see that they self-socialize by emulating individuals of their sex. And that means also that the concept of gender is applicable to them, because they are also culturally influenced. They're influenced by the behavior of adults around them. And that's why I use the word gender also for the other primates.
Okay, so I want to read something to you from your book, and then I want to discuss that for a second. This is from Deborah Bloom. You cite her. My son Marcus passionately covets toy weaponry. Denied even so much as one lousy plastic pistol by his gun-intolerant mother, he is compensated by building armaments out of everything from clay to kitchen utensils. I watched him charge after the cat, shouting, "Shoot him with a toothbrush!" And I found myself mentally throwing up my hands. Now, to me, that's kind of amusing, but I didn't really find it amusing. I actually found it really dark, because the line of work that you're pursuing, which shows quite clearly, as does the personality literature on these topics, that these toy preferences and behavioral differences are deeply grounded in biology. And they may also be fostered culturally, but fundamentally, it's the manifestation of an intrinsic mode of being, an instinctual pattern. And this woman, this author, says, she's throwing up her hands because she can't stop her son from being a boy. I don't find that amusing. I find that actually quite horrifying. And, the idea
that has to do with the desire of many parents to influence their children and to make them sort of gender neutral, and to have boys play with dolls and girls play with trucks. And of course, there are a few who will do that. But they're trying to go against whatever